I was calmly watching my favorite baseball game when my son-in-law stormed in, yanked the cord out, and growled, "Enough of this garbage. In our house, we only watch intelligent programs." My daughter just smiled and nodded in agreement. I quietly smiled back and went to my room. The next morning, they came home and found the doors locked. Their keys didn't work. They started pounding and screaming like maniacs when they realized what I had done. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Sylvester Morrison. I'm 67 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon. Spent 38 years coaching college baseball at Portland Community College before I retired 2 years ago. I always thought respect was something you earned through actions, not demanded through words. Turns out, some people need to be reminded of that. I live with my daughter Jessica and her husband Jeffrey in a house on Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard. Well, technically, I live in their house, as they love to remind me. That's what they think, anyway. Jessica wasn't always like this. I remember when she was 7, waiting for me outside the locker rooms after practice. Baseball glove way too big for her tiny hands. She'd make me pitch to her in the parking lot until the sun went down. "Just 5 more, Dad, please." Those were good years. Then 6 years ago, she met Jeffrey Morrison. Jeffrey is 38, works night shifts as a manager at an Amazon distribution center. Makes about $78,000 a year, which he mentions at least twice a week. He's the kind of man who watches documentaries about successful entrepreneurs and then lectures everyone about mindset and optimization. The first time I met him, he told me coaching was basically babysitting with a whistle. I should have seen it coming then. The change in Jessica happened gradually, like rust spreading across metal. First, she stopped calling me Dad and started with Sylvester when Jeffrey was around. Then came the little comments. "We need the living room tonight," instead of asking, "Could you keep it down?" when I was watching a game at reasonable volume. By the 3rd year of their marriage, I'd become furniture. Expensive, inconvenient furniture they couldn't quite figure out how to dispose of. Jeffrey made sure I knew my place. He'd walk into rooms and change the channel without asking. He'd invite his friends over and introduce me as Jessica's father, staying with us temporarily, even though I'd been here longer than he had. When I'd make dinner, he'd push the plate aside and order takeout, saying he preferred real food. Jessica would just smile. That same smile she gave him when he said something cruel. That same nod of agreement when he dismissed me. My daughter had become a stranger, wearing a familiar face. That Sunday evening, it was the middle of June, one of those rare, beautiful Portland nights when the air smells like roses and rain. I was in my room watching the Mariners game. Important game, playoff implications, bottom of the 9th. I had my collection of vintage baseball cards spread out on the bed beside me, organizing them like I did every Sunday. This was my ritual, my small corner of peace. I heard Jeffrey's footsteps coming down the hall. Heavy, purposeful, the kind of walk that means trouble. The door flew open without a knock. Jeffrey stood there, face red, looking at me like I'd committed some terrible crime. "What the—" I started, but he was already crossing the room. He grabbed the TV cord and yanked it straight out of the wall. The screen went black just as the batter was swinging. The sudden silence was deafening. "Enough of this garbage!" Jeffrey's voice was loud enough that I knew Jessica could hear it from the living room. In our house, we only watch intelligent programming, educational content, not grown men playing with balls. I looked at him, this man-child who'd somehow convinced my daughter he was worth following. He was breathing hard, like he'd just won some great victory. Jessica appeared in the doorway behind him. I waited for her to say something, to tell him he was out of line. We made eye contact for just a second. She smiled. Not a big smile, just a small curve of her lips. Then she nodded her head, agreeing with him. That nod hit harder than any punch could have. "I see," I said quietly. Jeffrey was still standing there, holding the cord like a trophy. "From now on, you follow house rules. This is our home, and you're a guest here. You got that, old man?" I stood up slowly. Jeffrey tensed, maybe expecting an argument. But I've coached teenage boys for 4 decades. I know when to pick a fight and when to wait for a better play. "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice calm, almost pleasant. "This is your house." The surprise on his face was almost worth it. He'd been ready for a confrontation. Good. Glad we understand each other. He dropped the cord on my bed and walked out, Jessica trailing behind him like a shadow. I heard them in the living room, Jeffrey's voice carrying, "See? You just have to be firm with these old-timers. They need boundaries." Jessica laughed, actually laughed. I sat back down on my bed, looking at the dark TV screen, at my scattered baseball cards, at the life I'd somehow let myself be reduced to. The Mariners game was still going on somewhere, but I'd never know how it ended. That's when something shifted inside me. Not anger. Anger is hot and fast and stupid. This was colder, clearer. I smiled to myself in the empty room. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even try. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the streetlights, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Around 3 a.m, when the house was completely silent, I made my decision. Tomorrow, things would start changing. The next morning, I left the house before Jeffrey and Jessica woke up. Told myself I needed coffee, but really, I needed space to think clearly. I drove to Stumptown Coffee on Division Street, ordered a black coffee, and sat in the corner booth where nobody would bother me. The morning light came through the windows at an angle that reminded me of early practices, when the field was still wet with dew and the kids were still half asleep. I used to love those quiet moments before the chaos started. I pulled out my phone and stared at it for a long time. 15 years, that's how long ago I'd bought that house on Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard. 2010, right after the market crash, when prices were reasonable and I still had my full coaching salary plus pension savings. $187,000. I remember the exact number because I'd spent months calculating if I could afford it. Jessica had just turned 20, working her first real job, talking about wanting a place of her own someday. I'd wanted to help her, to give her something solid to build on. But I also wasn't stupid. I'd seen too many stories about family helping family, only to get burned later. So I'd set up a living trust, put the house in Jessica's name, but kept myself as the trustee and beneficiary. It meant she'd inherit it eventually, but I maintained control. The lawyer had explained it carefully. As long as I was alive, I could manage the property however I saw fit. There were conditions written into the trust, simple ones. Respectful treatment, right to use the home without restrictions. Basic human decency, really. Jessica never asked about the details. She was just excited to have a house with her name on the title. I'd moved in temporarily to help with mortgage payments. Then the temporary became permanent. Then Jessica met Jeffrey. Then Jeffrey moved in. Then I became the guest in my own house. The beautiful irony was that Jeffrey had no idea. Neither did Jessica, apparently. They'd looked at that title, seen Jessica's name, and assumed it meant complete ownership. They'd never bothered to check the fine print, never asked about the trust structure. Why would they? In their minds, I was just the old man living off their charity. I took a long sip of coffee. It had gone cold while I was thinking. I remembered the day I'd first met Jeffrey. Jessica had brought him to one of my games. It was late spring, championship season. She was so nervous, kept fidgeting with her jacket. Jeffrey had shown up in boat shoes and a polo shirt, completely overdressed for a community college baseball game. "So you're the famous coach," he'd said, not bothering to shake my hand. "Jessica talks about you constantly." The way he said it made it sound like a problem. I'd tried with him. Really tried. I invited him to games, asked about his work, made an effort to find common ground. But Jeffrey had already decided who I was. An old man clinging to past glory, someone to be tolerated until he wasn't useful anymore. The shift happened slowly after they got married. First, Jeffrey started making comments about the house needing updates. Then about how my coaching pension wasn't real money compared to his salary. Then about how watching sports was for people who never accomplished anything themselves. Jessica never corrected him. She just put her hand on his arm and changed the subject. I thought about the previous night, about Jessica's smile, when Jeffrey ripped out that TV cord. That wasn't my daughter. That was someone I didn't recognize anymore. My phone was still in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years. Gordon Richards. Gordon had played second base for me back in the late 90s. Not the most talented kid I ever coached, but smart and determined. He'd gone to law school after graduation, sent me an invitation to his ceremony. I'd gone, proud as any real parent would be. We'd stayed in touch for a few years after that, the way you do, and then life got busy. I knew he had his own firm now. I'd seen it mentioned in the Portland Business Journal. My finger hovered over the call button. This was the moment. Once I made this call, there was no going back. This would stop being about hurt feelings and become about action, about consequences. I thought about Jessica's nod, about Jeffrey's sneer, about becoming invisible in my own home. I pressed call. Gordon answered on the third ring. Sylvester Morrison, I'll be damned. How long has it been? Too long, Gordon. How are you doing? We talked for a few minutes, catching up. His firm was doing well, specializing in estate law and property disputes. He'd gotten married, had twin daughters who were starting high school. Life had been good to him. I need a favor, I finally said. Well, not a favor exactly. I need professional help, and I'm willing to pay for it. What kind of help? Real estate law, specifically living trusts and property rights. There was a pause. Gordon's voice shifted, becoming more focused. You in some kind of trouble? Not trouble, but I need someone who knows Oregon property law inside and out. Someone who can handle a delicate situation. I can help you myself, or I can refer you to someone. What's the situation? I explained it simply. The house, the trust, the fact that my daughter and her husband thought they owned something they didn't. Gordon was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, You want to exercise your rights as trustee. I want to understand my options. Sylvester, what I'm about to tell you isn't legal advice until you retain someone officially. But based on what you're describing, if that trust is set up the way you say it is, you have significant power here, including the right to evict for violation of trust conditions. The word hung in the air between us. Evict. I'd recommend Kenneth Shaw, Gordon continued. He's the best property trust attorney in Portland. Expensive, but worth it. Want me to make an introduction? Yes, I said, no hesitation. Please. After we hung up, I sat there with my empty coffee cup, watching people walk by outside. Normal people with normal problems. I wondered what they'd think if they knew what I was planning. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a coach again, studying the field, planning the play, preparing for the game. Jeffrey thought he'd won last night. He had no idea the game hadn't even started yet. I smiled to myself and ordered another coffee. I had work to do. 2 days later, I found myself in a glass tower in downtown Portland, riding an elevator to the 12th floor. Kenneth Shaw's office was in one of those buildings that made you feel small, all polished marble and modern art that probably cost more than my first car. Gordon had called the previous afternoon. Kenneth can see you tomorrow morning at 10. He's expensive, Sylvester, but he's the best, and from what you told me, you need the best. The receptionist led me to a corner office with views of the city. Kenneth Shaw was younger than I expected, maybe early 50s, with silver hair and the kind of sharp suit that screamed competence. He shook my hand with a firm grip. Mr. Morrison, Gordon speaks highly of you. He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. He mentioned you have a property trust situation that needs clarification. I liked that word, clarification. Made it sound civilized. I pulled out the folder I'd brought, copies of the original living trust documents from 2010, the property deed, bank statements showing the purchase. I'd kept everything organized in a filing cabinet in my room, the one place Jeffrey never bothered to look, because it contained just old man stuff. Kenneth put on reading glasses and went through each page methodically. The silence stretched out, broken only by the rustle of paper and the distant hum of the city below. I watched his face, looking for any sign of what he was thinking. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at me directly. This is remarkably well constructed, he said. Whoever drafted this trust knew exactly what they were doing. You maintained full control as trustee while establishing your daughter as the remainder beneficiary. More importantly, you included specific conditions for continued use of the property. The respectful treatment clause, I said. Exactly. And the right to occupy and use the property without interference. He tapped one of the pages. These aren't vague moral obligations, Mr. Morrison. These are legally enforceable conditions. You documented that you paid the full purchase price, $100, $87,000, from your own pension savings. Your daughter contributed nothing to the acquisition. She doesn't know that, I said. She thinks the house is hers because her name is on the title. Kenneth's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of a familiar story. Let me be very clear about your legal position, he said, leaning forward. As the trustee and lifetime beneficiary of this property, you have the authority to manage it as you see fit. If the conditions of the trust have been violated, and based on what you've told me, they have been repeatedly, you have the legal right to revoke the living arrangement. The words hung in the air between us. Legal right to revoke. What does that mean in practical terms? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It means you can evict them, change the locks, serve formal notice, and require them to vacate within 30 days. Oregon law is clear on this. When a property owner or trustee terminates a living arrangement due to breach of conditions, the normal landlord-tenant protections don't apply in the same way. My hands were steady on the armrests of the chair. How would we do it? Kenneth pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making notes. First, we need to serve formal notice. I'll draft a document citing the specific violations of the trust conditions, the interference with your use of the property, the disrespectful treatment, any threats or attempts to force you out. Then we arrange for a locksmith to change all the locks. You post the eviction notice on the property. They have 30 days to remove their belongings and vacate. They'll fight it, I said. They can try. But Mr. Morrison, this trust is airtight. You funded the property entirely. You maintained the mortgage payments. You established clear conditions that have been violated. If they challenge this in court, they'll lose. More importantly, they'll spend a lot of money on lawyers only to reach the same conclusion. I thought about Jeffrey's face when he'd ripped out that TV cord, the smug certainty that he controlled everything. How much will this cost me? My retainer for a case like this is $4,200. That covers the drafting of all necessary documents, the formal notice, consultation on the eviction process, and representation if they do challenge it legally. Given the strength of your position, I don't anticipate extended litigation, but if it comes to that, we can discuss additional fees. I'd saved carefully from my coaching pension. I had about $70,000 in the bank, enough for a comfortable retirement, enough to handle a few unexpected expenses. $4,200 was a lot of money, but some things were worth the cost. When can we start? Kenneth checked his calendar. I can have the initial documents drafted by early next week. You'll need to sign them in the presence of a notary. I can recommend someone reliable. Once everything is formalized, you choose the date for the lock change and notice posting. I'd suggest doing it when they're both away from the property. Minimizes the potential for confrontation. I thought about their routines. Jeffrey's night shifts at Amazon, Jessica's habit of bringing him dinner every Wednesday evening, staying there for a few hours while he ate and they talked. That little tradition they'd started about a year ago. One of the few sweet things left in their relationship. I know when, I said. We spent another hour going through details. Kenneth was thorough, asking questions about every aspect of my situation. How long had I lived there? What were the specific incidents of disrespect? Had there been any physical threats? Any attempts to coerce me into leaving? I told him about the TV incident, about Jeffrey's increasing hostility, about the conversations I'd overheard about selling the house and finding me a cheap apartment somewhere. Kenneth wrote it all down. As I was leaving, he said something that stayed with me. Mr. Morrison, I handle a lot of estate disputes, family situations that turn ugly. What I've learned is that people show you who they really are when they think you're powerless. Your daughter and her husband made a mistake. They confused kindness with weakness. I rode the elevator back down, walked out into the Portland afternoon. The city felt different somehow, sharper, more alive. For 15 years, I'd been thinking about that house as Jessica's future, her inheritance, her security. I'd structured the trust to protect her while keeping some control for myself. Insurance against the unknown. I'd never imagined the unknown would be her. That evening, I sat in my room with the door closed, listening to Jeffrey and Jessica in the living room. They were watching one of those documentary series Jeffrey loved, something about successful entrepreneurs and their morning routines. This is what I'm talking about, Jeffrey was saying. Discipline, structure, not wasting time on meaningless entertainment. I heard Jessica murmur agreement. Through my door, I could smell dinner, something Jessica had cooked. They hadn't offered me any, hadn't even mentioned they were eating. I'd made myself a sandwich earlier, eaten it alone in my room like I was back in college. This was my house. I'd bought it with money I'd earned over 38 years of coaching. Money from summer camps and private lessons. Money from getting up at 5 in the morning to run practices before my teaching shifts. This house existed because of my work, my sacrifice, my planning. And I was eating sandwiches alone in my room while Jeffrey decided what programs were acceptable to watch. The transformation happening inside me wasn't rage. It was colder than that, clearer. It was the same feeling I used to get in the 9th inning of a tied game, when the pressure was highest and the margin for error was gone. Focus, purpose, the absolute certainty of what needed to be done. I opened my laptop and started making a list, everything I needed to do, in order. Call Kenneth next week for the documents. Find a notary. Research locksmiths. Map out the timing. I smiled at the screen in the dim light of my room. Jeffrey thought he'd won. He had no idea what was coming. A week passed, the longest week of my life, watching Jeffrey and Jessica move through the house like they owned it, which in their minds they did. I became a student of their patterns, their habits, their casual cruelty. Thursday evening, I was in the kitchen making coffee when they came in discussing their weekend plans. They talked around me like I was a piece of furniture. "We should measure the master bedroom," Jessica said to Jeffrey. "The real estate agent said staging is important." "Good idea. And we need to get that carpet cleaned in the back room. Can't have buyers seeing stains." The back room? My room? They were already planning how to present it to strangers. I poured my coffee and left without a word. Behind me, I heard Jeffrey laugh. "Did you see his face? Old man's probably worried we'll kick him out before he's ready." If only he knew. The following morning, Kenneth called. "Documents are ready. When can you come in to sign?" "This afternoon work?" "Perfect. I've also contacted a notary, Patrick Walters. He runs Portland Notary Services on Southeast Division Street. Very professional, very discreet. I've worked with him on dozens of cases." That afternoon, I told Jessica I was going to run errands. She barely looked up from her phone. Kenneth's office felt familiar now, less intimidating. He spread the documents across his desk. Official-looking papers with legal headers and numbered paragraphs. Everything was there in black and white. My name as trustee. Jessica's name as remainder beneficiary. The conditions of use. The violations of those conditions. The formal notice of revocation. "Read through everything carefully," Kenneth said. "If you have questions, ask." I read each page slowly. The language was dense, full of whereas and heretofore, but the meaning was clear. I was exercising my rights as the property owner and trustee. I was terminating their residency. They had 30 days to vacate. I signed where Kenneth indicated. My hand was steady. "Now you need to get these notarized," Kenneth said, putting the documents in a folder. "Patrick is expecting you. After that, you'll need to decide on timing for the lock change. I can recommend a locksmith if you need one." "I'd appreciate that." He wrote down a name and number on his business card. "Mike's Locksmith Service. Tell them I referred you. They're fast, professional, and discreet. They've handled situations like this before." I took the card and the folder. "What happens when they see the notice?" "They'll probably call a lawyer. The lawyer will review the trust documents and tell them the same thing I'm telling you. It's legal and enforceable. They might try to file a challenge in court, but honestly, Mr. Morrison, they'd be wasting their money. This trust is rock solid. And if they refuse to leave after 30 days, then we get the sheriff involved, but it rarely comes to that. Once people understand the legal reality, they usually comply." I left Kenneth's office and drove to Southeast Division Street. Portland Notary Services was in a small professional building, the kind of place you'd drive past 100 times without noticing. Patrick Walters was older than I expected, early 60s, with careful eyes and the methodical manner of someone who'd spent decades making sure every detail was correct. He reviewed each document, checked my identification, watched me sign in his presence. Then he applied his official seal and signature. The sound of that stamp coming down, solid final, sent a small thrill through me. "These are in order," Patrick said, handing me the completed paperwork. "Keep them somewhere safe." "I will." "And Mr. Morrison?" He looked at me over his reading glasses. "I've been doing this work for 33 years. I've notarized a lot of family property disputes. My advice? When the time comes, stay calm. Don't engage emotionally. Let the documents speak for themselves." Good advice. That evening I called Mike's locksmith service from my car, parked at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the house. A woman answered. "I need to change all the locks on a property," I said. Kenneth Shaw referred me. "Ah, yes. What kind of timeline are we talking about?" I thought about Jeffrey's schedule. His night shifts ran Sunday through Wednesday, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Jessica's habit of bringing him dinner Wednesday evenings, usually leaving the house around 7 and not returning until 10 or 11. I need it done on a Wednesday morning, early. "Can you do that?" "How early?" 6 a.m. A pause. "That's going to cost extra for the early service. We're talking about a house? How many exterior doors?" "Front door, back door, side garage entry. 3 total. We can do that in under 90 minutes. For a 6 a.m. start on a Wednesday, with 3 standard deadbolts, you're looking at $850. I had the money. I had always been careful with finances, always saved more than I spent. Coaching didn't make you rich, but it taught you the value of planning ahead. "I'll take it," I said. 2 weeks from today. I'll call you the day before to confirm." After I hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, watching people walk past on the street. Normal people doing normal things, buying coffee, heading home from work, living their lives without drama. I was about to blow up my daughter's life, our relationship, whatever was left of it, the illusion of family harmony that we'd all been pretending to maintain. But what was the alternative? Keep eating sandwiches alone in my room? Keep being told what I could watch on TV in my own house? Keep listening to them plan to sell the home I'd bought with my money and find me an apartment somewhere? I thought about all those baseball seasons, all those young men I'd coached, the ones who went on to play college ball, the ones who got drafted, the ones who just learned to love the game and carried that with them into their regular lives. I'd taught them about strategy, about patience, about waiting for the right pitch. This was the right pitch. I drove home. Jessica was cooking dinner, something that smelled good. Jeffrey was on the couch with his laptop, probably reading about productivity, optimization, or some other topic that made him feel superior. They didn't look up when I came in. I went to my room and pulled out my old coaching notebook, the one I'd used to track plays and strategies. On a fresh page, I wrote down the timeline. Today, documents notarized. Check. Next week, confirm locksmith appointment. Wednesday morning, 2 weeks from now, lock change at 6 a.m. Wednesday morning, post-eviction notice. Wednesday afternoon, wait. Under that, I wrote, they have until 30 days from notice to vacate. I stared at those words for a long time. 30 days to upend their entire world, the same way they'd spent 6 years slowly upending mine. Fair was fair. That night at dinner, they'd made enough for me this time, though it felt like an afterthought. Jeffrey started talking about the housing market. "Properties in our neighborhood are selling fast," he said. "We should list in the next month or 2. Get ahead of the fall, slow down." Jessica nodded. "The agent said we could expect around $520,000, maybe more if we stage it right." They were discussing this in front of me. Not asking, not involving me. Just talking about selling my house like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. I took a bite of chicken, said nothing. Jeffrey glanced at me. "You okay with that, Sylvester? We'll help you find a nice place, probably something smaller, easier to maintain." The concern in his voice was so fake it almost made me laugh. "Sounds fine," I said calmly. "You two know best." They exchanged a look, that satisfied glance of people who think they've successfully managed a difficult situation. I finished my dinner, thanked Jessica for cooking, and went to my room. 2 weeks. They had 2 weeks of thinking they controlled everything. I pulled out my vintage baseball card collection, my pride and joy, cards I'd been collecting since I was a kid. Some of them were worth decent money now, but that wasn't why I kept them. I kept them because they reminded me of a time when things were simpler, when a game was just a game and family meant something. I started packing them carefully in protective sleeves and boxes. If I was going to change the locks, I needed my valuables secured first. The cards, my important documents, the photo albums from when Jessica was small. 2 weeks to prepare, 2 weeks to make sure everything was ready, and then the game would begin. The 2 weeks crawled by like a tied game in extra innings. Every day felt longer than the last, watching Jeffrey and Jessica move through their routines, completely oblivious to what was coming. The night before, Tuesday evening, Jeffrey was in rare form at dinner. Jessica had made pot roast, and we were all sitting at the table together, something that happened less and less frequently. "You know what I realized today?" Jeffrey said, cutting into his meat. "People who spend their whole lives watching sports are basically living vicariously through others. They never accomplish anything themselves, so they invest emotionally in strangers playing games." He looked directly at me when he said it. Jessica laughed, that same tinkling laugh that had started to sound like nails on a chalkboard. "That's so true. It's kind of sad when you think about it." I took a bite of pot roast, chewed slowly, swallowed. "You make a good point," I said calmly. "Some people do waste their lives on meaningless things." Jeffrey seemed surprised I'd agreed. He leaned back in his chair, warming to his subject. "Exactly. That's why we only consume educational content. Documentaries about successful people, business podcasts, material that actually enriches your mind." "Very wise," I said, reaching for the water pitcher. The irony was almost painful. Here was a man who managed the night shift at a warehouse, lecturing me about success while planning to sell a house he didn't own. But I kept my face neutral, my voice steady. After dinner, I helped clear the dishes, something I always did, even though they rarely acknowledged it. Jeffrey retreated to the living room to watch one of his documentaries. Jessica went to their bedroom to pack Jeffrey's lunch for his shift. I went to my room and closed the door. The final preparations had already been done over the past few days. My baseball card collection was safely stored in waterproof containers. My important documents, birth certificate, social security card, pension paperwork, and most importantly, the original living trust papers, were in a fireproof box. Photo albums from Jessica's childhood, back when she still smiled at me with genuine warmth, were carefully packed. I'd even bought a new TV for my room and had it delivered the previous week. When Jeffrey asked about it, I told him I wanted to watch games without disturbing anyone. He'd actually seemed pleased, like he'd successfully trained me to know my place. Tonight, I did one final check. Everything valuable, everything irreplaceable, was secure. Tomorrow morning, this room would be the only space in the house that truly felt like mine. By tomorrow afternoon, the entire house would be. I barely slept. Not from anxiety, from anticipation. It was the same feeling I used to get before championship games, that electric awareness that everything was about to change. At 5:30 in the morning, my alarm went off. I got up, showered, dressed in jeans and a comfortable shirt, made coffee in the kitchen while the house was still silent. Jeffrey had left for his night shift around 10:30 the previous evening. Jessica was asleep in their bedroom. At exactly 6 o'clock, I heard the van pull up outside. Mike's locksmith service, right on time. 2 men got out, one older, probably in his 50s, and a younger guy who looked like he might be the older one's son. They had toolboxes and what looked like new lock sets in packaging. I met them at the front door before they could knock. "Mr. Morrison?" the older one asked quietly. "That's me. Mike sent us. Said you needed all exterior locks changed this morning. Front, back, and garage entry?" "Correct. And I need it done before 7:30. He checked his watch. "No problem. We'll start with the front door, then work our way around." They got to work immediately, and I have to say they were professionals. Quiet, efficient, no unnecessary questions. The sound of the drill was louder than I'd expected, and I tensed, waiting for Jessica to wake up and come investigate. But her bedroom was at the back of the house, and apparently she was a heavier sleeper than I'd thought. Or maybe she'd gotten used to tuning out noises that didn't directly concern her. By 6:40, the front door was done. By 7:10, the back door. The garage entry took a bit longer. The old lock was stubborn. But by 7:25, they were finished. The older locksmith handed me 3 sets of new keys. "All set, Mr. Morrison. You're the only person with access now." I paid them the $850 in cash. I'd withdrawn it from the bank the previous week. They packed up their tools and left just as quietly as they'd arrived. 7:30. Right on schedule. I heard movement from Jessica's bedroom. Her alarm. She'd be getting ready to take Jeffrey his dinner. Their Wednesday tradition. I went to the living room and sat in the armchair by the window, the one with a clear view of the front walkway. I had a fresh cup of coffee and my phone. Kenneth Shaw had sent me the final eviction notice the previous day, a PDF I'd printed on heavy paper at the local copy shop. At 7:45, Jessica emerged from her bedroom, dressed and carrying a thermal lunch bag. She moved through the kitchen, completely focused on her routine. She didn't even glance toward the living room where I sat. I heard the front door open. The new lock worked smoothly, and then closed behind her. Through the window, I watched her walk to her car, get in, and drive away. The house fell silent. I set down my coffee cup and stood up. Time for the final piece. From my room, I retrieved the printed eviction notice. It was official-looking, typed on Kenneth Shaw's law firm letterhead, with all the appropriate legal language. At the top, in bold letters, "Official Notice of Eviction." Below that, the details: the property address, Jessica and Jeffrey's names, the basis for eviction under the living trust, the 30-day deadline. Patrick Walters had notarized it the previous week, his official seal embossed at the bottom, next to Kenneth's signature. I took a roll of clear packing tape and went to the front door. The notice was laminated. Kenneth had suggested that to protect it from weather. I taped it securely to the door at eye level, making sure every corner was firmly attached. Then I stepped back and looked at it. Official, legal, undeniable. I checked my watch. 8:50. Jessica would be at the Amazon warehouse by now, probably sitting with Jeffrey in the break room while he ate the dinner she'd brought. They'd talk about their plans, about the house they were going to sell, about finding me a nice little apartment. They had no idea their world was about to implode. I went back inside. Using my new key felt strange and satisfying, and returned to the living room armchair. My phone was on silent, but I kept it nearby. Jessica would probably try calling once they got home and realized their keys didn't work. The waiting was almost meditative. I thought about all the games I'd coached, all the moments when victory hung in the balance. You learn patience in baseball. You learn that timing is everything. You learn that the sweetest wins are the ones you earn through careful planning and perfect execution. This was my perfect game. Around 2 o'clock, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I stayed in my chair, coffee cup in hand. I'd made several cups over the past few hours, more for something to do than because I needed the caffeine. I heard footsteps approaching the front door, then the sound of a key sliding into the lock. A pause, the key being pulled out. Inserted again, jiggled. "What the—" Jeffrey's voice muffled through the door. "What's wrong?" Jessica asked. "The key isn't working." More aggressive jiggling. "Did you do something to your key?" "No, mine's fine. Here, let me try." A pause. More unsuccessful attempts. "This doesn't make sense," Jessica said, and I could hear the first edge of worry in her voice. "Why wouldn't our keys work?" Then Jeffrey's voice, louder, angrier. "Did that old man change the locks?" Footsteps moving away. They were probably going around to check the back door. I heard them in the backyard, more frustrated sounds. Then footsteps on the side path, trying the garage entry. Nothing would work. All 3 locks were new. Their keys were useless. Then the pounding started. Heavy fists on the front door. Jeffrey, definitely. The door rattled in its frame, but held firm. "Sylvester!" Jeffrey's voice was a roar now. "Sylvester, open this door right now!" More pounding. I took another sip of coffee, completely calm. "Dad!" Jessica's voice joined in. "Dad, what's going on? Why won't our keys work?" I heard her phone dial. Seconds later, my phone vibrated with her call. I watched it ring. Didn't answer. She tried again. Again, I let it ring. "He's not answering," Jessica said, panic creeping into her voice. "I swear to—" Jeffrey's voice trailed into incoherent rage. More pounding, hard enough that I wondered if his hands would bruise. Then silence. A long pause. "Jeffrey, look." Jessica's voice was different now, quieter. "There's something on the door." I stood up, setting down my coffee cup. This was it. Footsteps moved closer to the door. I could imagine them reading it, their eyes scanning the words, their brains struggling to process what they were seeing. The silence stretched out for nearly a minute. Then Jeffrey exploded. What the? This is... No, no way, this isn't real. He was shouting loud enough that neighbors might hear. This is fake. This has to be fake. I heard paper tearing. He'd ripped the notice off the door. Smart move, Jeffrey. Destroy evidence. That'll help your case. Oh my. Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. Oh my. This can't be happening. More pounding on the door, frenzied now. Sylvester! Sylvester! Get out here right now and explain this. I walked to the door slowly, giving them time to fully absorb what they'd read. When I opened it, they both took a step back, like I'd become someone they didn't recognize. And maybe I had. Jeffrey's face was the color of raw hamburger meat, red and blotchy with rage. His eyes were wild, and he was still clutching the torn eviction notice in his shaking hand. Jessica stood behind him, one hand over her mouth, her eyes so wide I could see white all around the irises. What is this? Jeffrey thrust the crumpled paper at me. What kind of sick joke is this? I looked at the destroyed notice, then at him. That's an official eviction notice. You just destroyed a legal document. Fortunately, I have copies. Eviction? His voice cracked on the word. You can't evict us. This is Jessica's house. Actually, it's not. I kept my voice level, almost pleasant. This house belongs to a living trust that I established in 2010. I'm the trustee. Jessica is the remainder beneficiary, which means she inherits when I die. Until then, I maintain full control. Jessica made a small sound, like air escaping from a balloon. Her hand dropped from her mouth. Dad, that's... You said you bought this house for me. You put my name on it. I put your name on the title through a trust. Yes, for inheritance purposes. But I bought this house with $187,000 of my own money, pension savings I'd been accumulating for decades. The trust documents are very clear about the conditions of use. Jeffrey's mouth was working, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. It would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. You're lying, he finally managed. You're making this up. You can't just kick us out of our own house. It's not your house, Jeffrey. It never was. And yes, I can. The trust conditions specified respectful treatment and the right to occupy the property without interference. You violated both conditions repeatedly. Therefore, I'm exercising my legal right as trustee to terminate your residency. I gestured at the paper he was still clutching. As you can see from the notice, or what's left of it, you have 30 days to vacate the premises. That deadline is in writing and notarized. Jessica's legs seemed to give out. She sat down hard on the front step, her face draining of all color, until she looked like she might pass out. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. I'm calling a lawyer, Jeffrey said, fumbling for his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. This is illegal. You can't do this. We'll sue you for everything you have. Feel free, I said calmly. The documents are ironclad. I have already consulted with Kenneth Shaw at Portland Trust and Estate Law Group. He assures me everything is completely legal under Oregon law. But by all means, waste your money on attorneys. They'll tell you the same thing. Jeffrey had his phone to his ear now, pacing in small circles on the walkway. Yes, I need a lawyer. Real estate. It's an emergency. His voice faded as he walked toward the street, still clutching the torn notice. I looked down at Jessica, still sitting on the step. Tears were streaming down her face, but she wasn't making a sound. Just silent tears, one after another. Dad, she whispered, please, this is our home. That word, our, hung in the air between us. Is it? I asked quietly. When did it become our home, Jessica? Was it when Jeffrey unplugged my TV and told me what I could watch? Was it when you both discussed selling the house at dinner, talking about finding me an apartment, never once asking what I wanted? Was it when he called me a deadbeat for watching sports in my own house? Her eyes met mine, and for just a second I saw recognition there. Awareness. Then it was gone, replaced by panic. But where will we go? I imagine you'll find something, I said. The same way you were planning to find me, a nice little apartment on Social Security. Shouldn't be too hard for two working adults with a combined income of over $120,000 a year. Jeffrey was coming back, his face even redder than before. My lawyer can't meet until tomorrow, but he says you can't legally lock us out without going through formal eviction proceedings. I haven't locked you out, I corrected. I've changed the locks on my property and served you with formal notice of eviction. You have 30 days to remove your belongings. That's more than generous, and it's exactly what Oregon law requires. If you'd like, I can let you in right now to pack some immediate necessities, but make it quick. The reality was starting to sink in. I could see it in their faces, that shift from outrage to understanding to fear. They'd based their entire future on the assumption that this house was theirs. Their plans, their security, their leverage over me, all of it evaporating in the space of a single afternoon. I don't understand, Jessica said, standing up shakily. Why would you do this? We're family. Family, I repeated the word slowly. Jessica, do you remember what you did 3 days ago when Jeffrey unplugged my TV? You smiled and nodded. You agreed with him when he called watching baseball garbage. You've spent 6 years choosing him over me, choosing his comfort over my dignity, choosing silence over standing up for what's right. But I didn't mean... Yes, you did. You meant every moment of it. Every time you looked away when he belittled me. Every time you laughed at his jokes at my expense. Every time you discussed selling my house like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. Jeffrey stepped between us, his jaw clenched. Fine. You want to play this game? We'll see you in court. We'll fight this. You're welcome to try. I pulled out my phone and showed him a PDF, the bank statements from 2010, showing the $187,000 withdrawal from my pension account and the corresponding payment to the title company. I have 15 years of documentation, property taxes paid from my account, maintenance expenses paid from my account, every single dollar traced back to me. Your lawyer will take one look at this and tell you you're wasting your money. Jeffrey grabbed Jessica's arm. Come on. We're not staying here to be lectured by this. He stopped himself, but the word hung there anyway. I'll give you 20 minutes to pack essentials, I said, stepping aside from the doorway. Clothes, toiletries, whatever you need for the next few days while you figure out your next move. But I'll be watching, and nothing leaves this house that isn't clearly your personal property. They pushed past me into the house they'd thought was theirs. I followed at a distance, watching as they scrambled through their bedroom, throwing clothes into suitcases with shaking hands. Jessica was crying openly now, mascara running down her face. Jeffrey's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. Neither of them looked at me. 18 minutes later, they hauled their suitcases to Jessica's car. I stood in the doorway, watching them load everything into the trunk and back seat. Jessica turned back one more time, tears still streaming. Dad, please, can't we talk about this? We just did, I said. You have 28 days left. I suggest you use them wisely. Jeffrey slammed the car trunk hard enough to make the whole vehicle shake. You'll regret this, old man. I promise you that. I smiled then, couldn't help it. Jeffrey, I already regret a lot of things. Trusting you to treat me with basic human decency. Watching my daughter turn into someone I don't recognize. Letting this situation go on as long as I did. But this? I gestured at the house behind me. This is the first thing I haven't regretted in years. They got in the car. Jessica was sobbing in the passenger seat. Jeffrey's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. As they pulled out of the driveway, Jeffrey rolled down his window one last time. This isn't over. Actually, I called back, it's just beginning. I watched their car disappear down the street, then turned and walked back into my house. My house. I closed the door behind me. The new lock clicked satisfyingly into place, and stood in the sudden silence. The living room looked exactly the same. The kitchen, the hallway, everything was identical to how it had been an hour ago. But somehow, the whole house felt different. Lighter. Like pressure I hadn't realized I was carrying had suddenly lifted. I walked to my room, pulled out my laptop, and sent Kenneth Shaw a brief email. Plan executed. They've been served notice and have vacated temporarily. Expect they'll contact legal counsel soon. His response came 3 minutes later. Excellent. Keep all documentation of today's events. If they file anything, contact me immediately. Otherwise, I'll see you when they inevitably challenge this." I closed the laptop and sat on my bed, looking around the room that had been my prison for the past 6 years. Tomorrow, I'd start reclaiming the rest of the house. I'd move my baseball card collection to the dining room, set up my TV in the living room where it belonged, maybe even have some of my old coaching friends over to watch a game. But tonight, I just sat in the quiet, drinking in the peace. Through the window, the Portland evening was settling in, soft and golden. The game wasn't over yet. Jeffrey would fight, I was sure of that. But for the first time in years, I wasn't playing defense anymore, and that made all the difference. That same evening, my phone rang, Jeffrey's number. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times in the next hour. Each time, I watched it ring and then go silent. The 5th time, I answered. "We need to talk." Jeffrey's voice was tight, controlled. Not the rage from earlier. This was something colder. "I'm listening." "Not on the phone, face to face. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. There's a coffee shop on—" "I know where Stumptown Coffee is," I said. "I'll be there." He hung up without another word. I went to bed early that night, but didn't sleep well. Not from worry, from anticipation. Jeffrey was going to try something. That much was obvious. The question was what. The next morning, I arrived at Stumptown 15 minutes early and took the same corner booth I'd sat in weeks ago when this all started. Full circle. Jeffrey and Jessica walked in at exactly 9. She looked like she'd been crying. Puffy eyes, no makeup. He looked like he hadn't slept. But there was something in his expression I recognized from coaching. Determination. The look players get when they're down by 3 runs in the 9th inning and refuse to accept defeat. They sat across from me. A waitress came over, but Jeffrey waved her away. "I talked to a lawyer last night," he started. No pleasantries. Straight to business. "A real estate attorney. He looked at the eviction notice you posted." "And?" "And he says we have options. He says a living trust can be challenged in court. He says there are grounds for arguing undue influence, that you manipulated Jessica when she was young and vulnerable." I almost laughed. Jessica was 20 years old when I bought that house. She had a job, paid her own bills, hardly vulnerable. "He also says," Jeffrey continued, ignoring me, "that family trusts can be invalidated if they violate implied moral obligations. A father has a duty to provide for his daughter. Using property as leverage to control her living situation could be seen as abuse of that duty." Now I did smile. Your lawyer's creative, I'll give him that. But creativity doesn't change the facts. I bought that house with my money. I established a trust with clear conditions. Those conditions were violated. Everything I've done is completely legal under Oregon law. Jessica finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "Dad, please, can we just talk about this? Without lawyers, without all this legal stuff. You're my father. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It used to mean everything to me," I said quietly. "But you chose to let Jeffrey treat me like garbage in my own home. You chose to laugh when he mocked me. You chose silence over standing up for what was right. So yes, Jessica, you're still my daughter. But that doesn't mean I'm going to let you walk all over me anymore." Jeffrey's jaw clenched. "We're filing a lawsuit. Today. We're going to fight this eviction, and we're going to win. That house has been Jessica's home for 15 years. No judge is going to let you throw your own daughter onto the street." "The house has been my property for 15 years, I corrected. "Jessica lived there as a beneficiary of a trust I created and funded entirely myself. And I'm not throwing her onto the street. I'm giving her 30 days to find alternative housing. That's more than generous." "Generous?" Jessica's voice rose. "You're taking away our home. Where are we supposed to go? Do you have any idea how much rent costs in Portland right now?" "About the same as it costs anywhere else, I imagine. And you have a combined income of over $120,000 a year. You'll manage." "We're using all our savings for the lawsuit," Jeffrey said. "Every penny we have is going toward legal fees to fight this. If you back down now, we can avoid all of this. We can work something out. Maybe we were insensitive. We can change. We can treat you better." There it was. The plea bargain. The last-minute negotiation. I'd seen it 1,000 times in baseball. The losing team trying to find any angle, any way to avoid the inevitable loss. No, I said simply. No? Jeffrey's face was reddening again. You're really going to do this? You're going to destroy your own family over a TV remote? This isn't about a TV remote, Jeffrey. This is about 6 years of systematic disrespect. This is about you treating me like a burden in a house I paid for. This is about my daughter choosing you over basic human decency. You had countless chances to treat me with respect. You chose not to take them. Jessica was crying again, silent tears streaming down her face. I never wanted it to be like this. I never wanted to choose between you and Jeffrey. You already chose, I said gently. 6 years ago. Every day since. You chose Jeffrey. That's fine. That's your right. But choices have consequences. Jeffrey stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Fine. You want a war? You've got one. We're filing today. And when we win, and we will win, you're going to regret this. Maybe, I said, staying seated. But I doubt it. They left. I ordered a coffee and sat there for a long time, watching the morning crowd come and go. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the small war being fought at a corner booth. Kenneth Shaw called me around 2 that afternoon. Mr. Morrison, I've been served notice that Jessica and Jeffrey Morrison are filing a lawsuit to contest the eviction and challenge the validity of the living trust. Are you surprised? Not even a little. Good, because we're going to win this, but it's going to take time and money. They've hired Ronald Davies. He's decent, aggressive, and expensive. This won't be quick. How expensive? For them? I'd estimate they'll spend at least $7,500 up front, probably closer to $15,000 total by the time this is done. For you, I'll need another $3,000 retainer to cover court filings and preparation. But Mr. Morrison, I want to be very clear. We have an ironclad case. They're going to lose. The only question is how much money they want to waste before accepting that. I thought about my savings. $70,000 minus the $4,200 I'd already paid Kenneth, minus the $850 for the locksmith. I could afford another $3,000. I could afford more if necessary. Do it, I said, whatever it takes. A week passed. I spent it reclaiming my house, room by room. I moved my baseball card collection into the dining room, displaying the best cards in protective frames on the walls. I set up my TV in the living room, the big screen I'd always wanted to use but never could, because Jeffrey controlled that space. I invited Tom Chen, an old coaching colleague, over to watch a Mariners game. It felt surreal, sitting in my own living room without permission, without worrying about Jeffrey's comments. You seem different, Tom said during the 7th inning. Lighter, somehow. I feel different, I admitted, and I did. 8 days after the eviction, I received a court summons. The lawsuit was official. Jessica Morrison and Jeffrey Morrison versus Sylvester Morrison, challenging the eviction and seeking a declaratory judgment on the validity of the living trust. Kenneth scheduled a meeting. We sat in his office, and he walked me through what would happen next. Discovery, depositions, court hearings, a trial date probably months away. They're hoping you'll settle, Kenneth said. That's the strategy. Make it expensive. Make it drawn out. Hope you give up and let them stay. I'm not giving up. I didn't think so, he smiled slightly, but I need to prepare you. They're going to get desperate. People get ugly when they're fighting for what they think is theirs. Expect Jessica to call you, crying. Expect Jeffrey to make threats. Expect mutual friends and family to get involved, taking sides. I don't have much family left, I said, and my friends know me well enough to know I wouldn't do this without good reason. Good, because this is going to get harder before it gets better. He wasn't wrong. The next few days proved Kenneth right. Jessica called me crying, begging me to reconsider. I didn't answer. She left voicemails, at first pleading, then angry, then pleading again. Jeffrey sent text messages alternating between threats and attempts at negotiation. Through it all, I stayed silent. Changed my locks, lived in my house, prepared for court. A week after receiving the summons, Jeffrey and Jessica found an apartment. I only knew because Jessica sent me a bitter text. Hope you're happy. We're paying $1,850 a month for a 1-bedroom dump in Gresham. All our savings are gone for the lawyer. This is what you wanted, right? I didn't respond. The first court hearing was set for 8 days later. Kenneth called me the day before to prepare. "Tomorrow is just preliminary," he explained. "The judge will hear both sides' positions, review the basic facts, and set a schedule for discovery and trial. Don't expect a decision yet, but this is where we establish the narrative." That night, I laid out my best suit, the one I'd worn to championship games and retirement ceremonies. I wanted to look like what I was, a retired professional who'd planned responsibly for his future, not some vindictive old man trying to hurt his family. The Multnomah County Courthouse was downtown, an imposing building that made me feel small. Kenneth met me outside, briefcase in hand, looking every inch the competent attorney. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a handful of other people waiting for their cases. Jessica and Jeffrey sat on the opposite side with their lawyer, Ronald Davies, a sharp-faced man in his 40s, with slicked-back hair and an expensive suit. Jessica looked at me once, her eyes red. I looked away. "All rise," the bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. The Honorable Judge Robert Clark presiding. Judge Clark was older than I expected, probably late 60s, with gray hair and the kind of face that had seen every variation of human conflict. He settled into his chair and glanced at the docket. "Morrison versus Morrison," he said. "This is a challenge to a property eviction based on a living trust. Mr. Davies, you're representing the plaintiffs?" "Yes, Your Honor." Davies stood smoothly. "Jessica Morrison and Jeffrey Morrison are challenging an unlawful eviction from their home of 15 years. The defendant, Sylvester Morrison, is Jessica's father. He has used a questionable trust document to force them from the only home they've known as a married couple." Judge Clark looked at Kenneth. "And you're representing the defendant?" "Kenneth Shaw for Sylvester Morrison, Your Honor. This isn't an unlawful eviction. It's the lawful exercise of property rights under a properly executed living trust. Mr. Morrison purchased the property in question in 2010 for $187,000 using his pension savings. He established a trust naming his daughter as remainder beneficiary while maintaining his own rights as trustee and lifetime beneficiary. The trust contained specific conditions for use of the property, which the plaintiffs violated." "What conditions?" the judge asked. "Respectful treatment of the beneficiary and right to occupy the property without interference. Your Honor, we have documentation showing a pattern of disrespectful conduct, including removal of Mr. Morrison's personal property, restrictions on his use of common areas, and discussions of selling the property without his knowledge or consent." Davies jumped in. "Your Honor, this is a family dispute being twisted into a property law case. Sylvester Morrison is using a legal technicality to punish his daughter for ordinary family disagreements. The trust itself is suspect, a father convincing his young daughter to sign documents that give him complete control over what she believes is her home. She was 20 years old," Kenneth countered, "an adult, and she didn't contribute a single dollar to the purchase. The title shows her name, yes, but only as beneficiary of a trust funded entirely by Mr. Morrison's money. We have bank records proving every claim." Judge Clark held up a hand. "I've read the preliminary filings. Mr. Shaw, I'll need to see those bank records, the original trust documents, and any evidence of the conditions being violated. Mr. Davies, you'll need to provide legal precedent for your claims about family trusts and moral obligations. I'm setting a discovery deadline of 2 weeks from today, and we'll reconvene for a full hearing after that." He looked at both parties. "I'll say this once. Family disputes like this rarely end well for anyone. If you can settle this among yourselves, I encourage it. If not, we'll let the law decide. But be prepared. These cases are expensive and emotionally draining. Make sure you're ready for what's coming." The gavel came down. The hearing was over in less than 20 minutes. Outside the courtroom, Jessica approached me while Jeffrey was talking to Davies. "Dad," she said quietly, "please, this is destroying us. The legal fees, the stress, the apartment we can barely afford. Jeffrey's talking about borrowing money from his parents. This is killing our marriage." I looked at her, really looked at her. She'd lost weight, dark circles under her eyes. This was taking its toll. But I also remembered her laugh when Jeffrey unplugged my TV, her smile when he called me a deadbeat, her silence when I needed her to speak up. "Jessica," I said, keeping my voice gentle, "I offered you respect and dignity in my home. All you had to do was offer the same in return. You chose not to. This isn't me destroying you. This is you facing the consequences of your choices. But we're family. Yes, and families should treat each other with respect. You forgot that. I'm just reminding you." Kenneth touched my elbow. "We should go." I walked away, leaving Jessica standing there in the courthouse hallway, tears streaming down her face. In the car, Kenneth said, "That was hard to watch. It was harder to live through 6 years of disrespect," I replied. "The judge seemed sympathetic to our position," Kenneth continued. "Davies is throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. But he knows the law isn't on his side. The trust is valid. The eviction is legal. They're going to lose. How long? Probably another 2 weeks for discovery, then one more hearing. If the judge rules in our favor, which I'm confident he will, the eviction stands and they have to vacate by the original deadline. If they appeal, it could drag on longer, but they'd need grounds for appeal, and frankly, they don't have any." I watched Portland pass by the window. What are the chances they actually appeal? Low! Appeals are expensive, and Davies will tell them they're wasting their money. My guess? After the next hearing, when the judge rules against them, they'll give up. They'll be angry. They'll blame you. But they'll move out. 2 weeks. I could handle 2 more weeks. That evening, alone in my house, I made myself dinner and ate it in the dining room, surrounded by my baseball cards. Through the window, I could see neighbors taking evening walks, kids playing in yards, normal life continuing. My phone buzzed. A text from Jeffrey. "You're going to regret this. When we win, and we will win, you'll have nothing. No family, no daughter, no one." Was it worth it? I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it without responding. The house was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in 6 years, truly mine. Whatever happened in court, whatever Jeffrey thought he could do to me, he'd already lost. He just didn't know it yet. I turned on the TV, my TV, in my living room, and settled in to watch the evening game. The Mariners were playing, bottom of the 8th, and I didn't have to worry about anyone telling me it was garbage television. Sometimes winning isn't about crushing your opponent. Sometimes it's just about reclaiming what was always yours. The second court hearing came 2 weeks after the first. Kenneth had been right. Discovery had only strengthened our case. Bank records from 2010 showing my pension withdrawal. Proof of every mortgage payment, property tax bill, and maintenance expense, all paid from my accounts. Testimony from the title company confirming I'd funded the entire purchase. Davies tried everything. He argued constructive fraud, claiming I'd deceived Jessica about the trust's terms. He argued unjust enrichment, claiming Jessica's presence in the house for 15 years gave her equity rights. He even tried arguing elder abuse in reverse, that enforcing the eviction was elder self-abuse, because I was destroying my family relationships. Judge Clark shut him down on every point. "Mr. Davies," the judge said, his voice tired, "you're a creative attorney, I'll give you that. But creativity doesn't overcome documentary evidence. Mr. Morrison purchased this property with his own funds. He established a valid trust. The conditions of that trust were violated. Oregon law is clear on this matter." He looked at Jeffrey and Jessica, sitting at the plaintiff's table. Jessica was crying silently. Jeffrey's face was stone. "I find in favor of the defendant, Sylvester Morrison. The living trust is valid and enforceable. The eviction notice is legal. The plaintiffs are ordered to vacate the property at 2847 Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard, no later than noon on the 2nd day of August, 2025. The gavel came down. Jessica's sob echoed in the courtroom. Jeffrey stood abruptly, his chair scraping. Davies tried to say something to him, but Jeffrey just walked out. Kenneth leaned over to me. "It's over. You won." I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, but also relieved. Justice, I'd learned, isn't always sweet. Sometimes it's just necessary. Outside the courthouse, Jessica caught up with me. Jeffrey was nowhere to be seen, probably already in the car, fuming. "Dad," her voice was raw, "please, we have 3 days. 3 days to find somewhere to move all our things, to figure out where we're going. Can't you give us more time? Just a week? 2 weeks? I looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes were red and swollen. She'd lost weight. The stress had carved lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before. Jessica, the judge gave you nearly a month from the original eviction notice. You've had time. You chose to spend it on lawyers instead of moving. Because we thought we could win. You thought wrong. I kept my voice gentle but firm. You thought I was powerless. You thought you could treat me however you wanted because I had nowhere else to go. You were wrong about that, too. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, a gesture that reminded me of when she was 7 and had fallen off her bike. Back then, I'd picked her up, bandaged her knee, told her everything would be okay. But she wasn't 7 anymore, and I couldn't fix this for her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have stood up for you. I should have told Jeffrey to stop. I should have... Yes, I said simply. You should have. Can we fix this, somehow? I thought about it, really thought about it. Jessica, I don't know. Maybe. But not now. Not while you're still with Jeffrey. Not while you're still choosing him over doing what's right. He's my husband, and I'm your father. But you forgot that when it mattered. Kenneth touched my elbow. We should go, Mr. Morrison. I nodded, started to turn away. Dad! Jessica's voice stopped me. I love you. I know I haven't shown it, but I do. I looked back at her. I love you too, Jessica. That's why this hurts so much. But love doesn't mean I'm going to let you treat me like I don't matter. I walked away. Behind me, I heard her crying. The next day, the final day before the eviction deadline, I stayed away from the house. I didn't want to watch them packing, didn't want to see their faces as they boxed up their lives. Instead, I went to a Mariners game with Tom Chen. We sat in the cheap seats, ate overpriced hot dogs, and watched our team lose in the 9th inning. It was perfect. That evening, when I got home, the house was dark, empty. I walked through it slowly, checking each room. The master bedroom was cleared out. No clothes in the closet, no toiletries in the bathroom. The dining room table had a single envelope on it. I opened it. Inside was a note in Jessica's handwriting. Dad, we took what was ours. The rest is yours. Jessica. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a simple acknowledgement that the battle was over. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. Tomorrow at noon, the sheriff would come to verify they'd vacated. The eviction would be complete. I made myself dinner, nothing fancy, just scrambled eggs and toast, and ate it at the dining room table. The house felt bigger somehow, emptier, yes, but also more mine. The next morning I woke early. The sheriff arrived at exactly 11:45, a woman in her 40s named Deputy Martinez. She walked through the house with a clipboard, checking each room, making notes. Property appears to be fully vacated, she said. No personal belongings remaining that I can see. Any damage? I thought about the walls they'd painted without asking, the carpet stain in the bedroom that had never quite come out. Nothing that can't be fixed. She handed me a form. Sign here. This confirms the eviction was completed without incident, and the property has been returned to you. I signed. My hand was steady. You're all set, Mr. Morrison. She gave me a professional smile. Have a good day. After she left, I stood in the living room, looking around at the house that was finally, completely, legally, mine again. 3 weeks passed, the best 3 weeks I'd had in years. I hired a contractor to renovate the master bedroom. New carpet, fresh paint, new fixtures. Cost me $3,400, but it was worth it. That room had been Jeffrey and Jessica's domain for 6 years. Now it would be mine. I set up a proper display for my baseball card collection. The rare ones went in a glass case in the dining room. My championship trophies from coaching, which had been stored in boxes, found places on shelves throughout the house. The living room became exactly what I'd always wanted. Comfortable furniture, my big screen TV, photos from my coaching years on the walls. I started having people over again. Tom Chen and his wife for dinner, some former players who still lived in Portland. We watched games, told old stories, laughed about the good old days. My house felt alive again, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about Jessica. Late in the third week, my phone rang. Her number. I stared at it for a long time before answering. Dad? Her voice was different, smaller somehow. Can we talk? In person? Where? Stumptown Coffee? Tomorrow morning? I'll be there. I arrived early, took my usual corner booth. Jessica came in 10 minutes later, alone. No Jeffrey. She looked different. Thinner still, but also somehow more present, like she'd woken up from a long sleep. She sat down across from me, ordered a coffee, and for a minute, we just sat in silence. I left him, she finally said. Jeffrey. 2 weeks ago. I didn't say anything, just waited. I got my own apartment, a studio in Southeast. It's small and it's not much, but it's mine. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Williams. She specializes in people who've been in controlling relationships. Was it controlling? I asked quietly. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Yes. I didn't see it at first. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. He was so confident, so sure of everything. After a while, it was just easier to agree with him than to argue. Easier to laugh at his jokes, even when they hurt other people. Easier to... She stopped, took a breath. Easier to let him make you invisible. Jessica, no, please, let me say this. She looked directly at me. What you did, the eviction, the court case, all of it, I was so angry at first. I thought you were being cruel, vindictive. I couldn't understand how you could do that to your own daughter. She wiped her eyes. But Dr. Williams helped me see something. You weren't punishing me. You were showing me what I'd become, what I'd let Jeffrey turn me into. A person who could watch her father be humiliated in his own home and do nothing. I felt something tight in my chest loosen slightly. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she continued. I don't know if you can or if you should. But I needed you to know. I understand now. What you did wasn't about revenge. It was about self-respect, about not letting people treat you like you don't matter. It was also about teaching you, I said. That respect goes both ways. That family means standing up for each other, not just standing by. I know that now. She smiled weakly. Expensive lesson, though. Jeffrey and I spent over $9,200 on lawyers. Lost our deposit on that apartment in Gresham. I'm working extra hours at the dental clinic just to cover rent. And Jeffrey? Last I heard, he moved in with his parents. He's talking about filing for divorce, claiming I abandoned the marriage. She shrugged. Let him. I should have left years ago. We sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop hummed with morning activity around us. I was thinking, Jessica said carefully, maybe we could have dinner sometime. Not at your house. I understand if you don't want me there. But maybe we could start over. Slowly. I thought about the little girl who used to wait for me after practice. The teenager who'd helped me coach summer camps. The young woman who'd been so excited when I bought that house, never knowing the real reasons behind the trust. I thought about the person she'd become under Jeffrey's influence, and the person she seemed to be becoming, now that she'd stepped away from him. Sunday dinner, I said. 5 o'clock. My house. Her eyes widened. Really? Really, but Jessica, one condition. Anything. We talk, really talk, about what happened, about why it happened, about how we make sure it never happens again. No more pretending everything's fine. No more avoiding difficult conversations. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. Yes, absolutely. Yes. We finished our coffee and talked about small things. Her apartment, her job, a documentary she'd watched that actually was pretty interesting. Not Jeffrey's kind of documentary, she said with a small smile. Just something she'd wanted to watch. When we parted, she hugged me. A real hug, not the obligatory kind she'd been giving me for years. Thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me even when I gave up on you. I drove home slowly, taking in the Portland streets, the familiar neighborhoods. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a minute, looking at the house. This whole thing could have gone differently. I could have kept quiet, kept enduring Jeffrey's disrespect, kept fading into the background of my own life. Told myself it was easier than making waves, better than risking my relationship with Jessica. But I'd learned something important. You can't have a real relationship with someone who doesn't respect you. And teaching someone about respect sometimes means They have to lose something first. Inside, the house was quiet. I turned on the TV. The Trailblazers were playing that evening, and settled into my armchair. My armchair in my living room in my house, watching whatever the hell I wanted to watch. The game was a good one. Close score. High tension. During a commercial break, I looked around at the walls I'd painted, the photographs I'd hung, the life I'd reclaimed. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It wasn't even about the house, though the house mattered. It was about remembering that you teach people how to treat you, and if you teach them they can treat you like nothing, they will. I'd taught Jessica a hard lesson, but she'd learned it. That was more than enough. The game came back on. I watched it all the way through to the final buzzer. Nobody interrupting, nobody telling me it was garbage, nobody making me feel small for enjoying something I loved. And when it was over, I made myself dinner, cleaned up, and sat on my back porch watching the Portland evenings settle in. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's just about reclaiming what was always yours. Your home, your dignity, your right to be treated like you matter. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it's about teaching the people you love that they're capable of being better than they've been. I finished my coffee and went inside. Tomorrow, I'd start planning Sunday dinner. Maybe I'd make pot roast. Jessica used to love that when she was young. We'd see how it went. No promises, no guarantees. Just two people trying to rebuild something that had been broken, one meal at a time. But tonight, the house was mine. The game was good, and for the first time in 6 years, I could watch it in peace. That was victory enough. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.